Welcome to TrojanVision One-on-One. I'm your host, Stephanie East. This is our show where we get to know the people around Troy University who make this campus such a special place. And joining us now is Dr. Kelly Suero, the chair of the World Languages and Cultures Department. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, first of all, tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, where you went to college, and just a little bit about what makes Kelly Kelly.
Sure, and how I got to Troy, probably.
Yes.
Everyone asks me that. I'm sure they ask you too. So I'm actually from Stillwater, Oklahoma. I was born and raised there. I did my undergraduate at Oklahoma State University. I double majored in English and Spanish. I couldn't decide at the time, but I wanted to leave both options available. And then I went to Purdue to do my master's and PhD. So I came to Troy in 2014. So this is my 11th year now here.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about your time here at Troy, but tell us about your PhD program and your field of study and about your dissertation as well.
Sure. So my master's is actually in Spanish language and culture. So that was a little bit more heavily focused on the linguistic aspects of the language. When you get into the PhD program in a language, first of all, not only do you have to be familiar with 4 languages total, not a lot of people know that, you have to decide if you want to go the literature route or the linguistics route. So I chose the literature route, mainly because literature is often involved with politics and history and sociology and a lot of the things that sort of make our society run, and I just find that really interesting. So I went that route. I specialized in Latin American literature.
So did you always know you wanted to teach?
I knew I wanted to teach once I got to Oklahoma State. So I formed really wonderful relationships with my professors who were wonderful, and I spent a lot of time sort of, studying their lives, how they lived, what type of schedules they had, and I thought, that is a really cool way to live. I love that. So I knew by the time I was probably a sophomore or junior that this was the right path for me. I just really enjoyed learning and continuing to learn, and I knew what lie ahead as far as research and publishing and all of those things go. And I was really excited about the opportunity and the challenge too, and I haven't regretted it since.
Tell us about maybe a special moment. I know I have a lot I want to talk to you about, including, you lead a lot of study abroad trips and about, the future of the department. But as far as like teaching in the classroom, do you have a specific event that may have stood out to you that you said, this is why I do what I do?
I had a professor at Oklahoma State from Columbia who was incredibly engaging with the students, with me in particular, but was really just a conversational professor. I felt really comfortable in class to share my ideas and, whatever those ideas were, and also coming at it from the angle of a non-native speaker of Spanish, right? Especially once I got to grad school, I was actually in the minority. Most of the grad students were native speakers, so it's kind of like I had a little bit something extra to prove. And so to be in an environment that was really conducive to learning and growing and sharing, I think that did it as far as letting me know this is how a professor should be in class, and that's what I try to emulate in the classroom too now.
Well, you mentioned being a non-native speaker, so what led you to love Spanish?
Yeah, so when I was in middle school, we had 2 options as far as electives were concerned. This is 6th grade when I was 12, so it was either physical education or language arts. And so I didn't want to do the physical education, and so I just kind of found myself in both a French and a Spanish course. And I just clicked a lot with the Spanish language. It's a Romance language, so there are a lot of similarities with English as well. We have a lot of cognates that make it easier to learn. And I really just thought, this is really fascinating. I want to learn more. And I was just excited to go to class as a sixth grader every day. And that really just began my love of the language and culture and my desire to know more.
That's so exciting that you found your passion at that age and that you could nurture it.
I feel very lucky, and that's a conversation I have with a lot of students who honestly don't know what they want to do. And they ask me like, well, did you know? And I'm like, yeah, I was the lucky one who knew. But I think it's just important to hone in on what you like, right? Even if at that time in sixth grade, I didn't know I wanted to be a professor, I just knew what I enjoyed. I knew what I liked. So that's sort of how I steer students as well, is to really hone in on what's interesting to you, what feels like extra work that you're studying, and what comes naturally to you. And languages just came naturally to me, English as well, even though I'm a native speaker of English. The English professors and students will tell you, that has nothing to do with it, of course. It's literature, it's the close study of the language. So it's just something that came really naturally to me. I really enjoyed it. And once I was in college, it was just an easy choice for me. But I do feel fortunate. I don't think everyone has that experience. And I tell students too, and I think this is just a true statement, we have to make these really life-changing decisions at 18 years old, right? We get into college at 18 and it's like, okay, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Sometimes that works out, it did for me, but often we get into some courses and we think, well, I was going to do this, but I really enjoy this more. So I always tell students it's never too late to change your mind, right? Keep your options open, explore. I think that's why general studies are so important, to get a little bit of everything, to get a taste of everything, because you may not realize what you're interested in until you're in that specific course, right? And so I think that makes it a little bit easier once you're in something you enjoy to kind of funnel it down a little bit more.
Well, and you are the chair of the World Languages and Cultures Department, and of course we think about speaking Spanish or speaking French, but the culture part is really important too. Tell us about what you teach your students about different cultures and the importance of going out to study abroad trips and experiencing the cultures of different countries.
Right, and it's interesting because every university has its own culture as well. I think sometimes we think of culture as only an international concept, but if you think of Troy University and then Alabama and Auburn, each one are so different. We each have our own culture, so it's something that I think anyone can relate with, even if they've never been out of the country before, right? That's a piece of advice my advisor gave me when I was at Purdue, was to really observe the culture of Purdue. And I was like, what in the world does that mean? But once I was in the program a few years, I thought, yeah, there is a particular culture here. And I think it's important to feel like you belong to that culture. And I think often students who come to Troy, we have many international students. We are known as the International Institute of Alabama, but we have so many domestic students that come here too and experience a sort of culture change, right? To me, where I'm from, Troy is a little bit of a smaller university, but I have many students who are from, for example, Goshen, Alabama. And in our conversations, they're like, no, this is a massive university. So perception, perspective is everything, right? And once my students get into the classroom, and not just me, I have wonderful faculty who all do the same thing. We study a little bit about each country. So there are 22 Spanish-speaking countries, if you include the United States, which you should, because Spanish is the second most spoken language in the United States. We study a little bit of the makeup of each country. There's sort of norms, like you can say, like in Central America, there's some cultural norms, and South America, there's some cultural norms too. So we provide that taste via classroom experience, but the real immersive experience is when they study abroad. So my faculty and we all lead study abroad trips. We lead our short-term study abroad trips that are usually between 10 to 14 days, depending on the program. And that's when students can really get a taste of the culture. They are in the culture 24/7 around the language. They're taking Spanish classes, they're exploring, they're learning. And it's sort of like what they've learned in the classroom, their books sort of come to life right before their eyes.
Well, tell us about some of the places, because as you mentioned, that is a big part of your department. Where are some of the places that you all have studied?
Sure. So one of our faculty, Dr. Albrecht, she takes students annually to Cuba and to Puerto Rico. I take students to Argentina, Uruguay. I've been to Peru as well. And my colleague, Ms. Fournier, she has taken students to Costa Rica, to Spain. She has joined me on a couple of trips to Argentina. This coming year, in 2026, I'll do a little plug since we're here, we are actually taking students to Argentina, Uruguay, and for the first time, Brazil. So we've never had a faculty-led program to Brazil. Brazil speaks Portuguese, as you know, but it's very similar to Spanish. I have a few students in my classrooms now that natively speak Portuguese, so my students have been around it and they're curious about it, and I think it will be a great experience.
Well, you mentioned putting in a plug because any student can go on a study abroad trip.
Absolutely, and that's sort of the way we design, specifically my department, we design our programs, is so that any student, regardless of the level of Spanish, can go and enjoy themselves and feel that this was a successful trip. So if you know just how to say hola, if that's all you know, if you are reading, short stories in Latin American literature, it is truly for anyone. Anyone can go. And if you, I believe, have a 2.5 GPA, you are eligible for the Chancellor's Award, which is a really important scholarship. It's $1,250 toward the program. So in many cases, that covers half of the program fee. And I always tell my students, I really wish someone would have paid for me to study abroad. So take advantage, and you can win that once per academic year. So we have what I like to call repeat offenders, and I have students that travel with me every summer. I tend to go in May. And it's just a wonderful experience for them, an opportunity to earn Troy credits too. Often I will partner what I'm doing with a class that they're interested in or taking. I've taken anthropology students, I've taken biology students, I've taken geography students. So there's always something that can be done, even if it's not specific to a Spanish course. It all interconnects, and that's part of Spanish too, is it really truly pairs with anything.
Well, and I love that you brought up the Chancellor's Scholarship for studying abroad, because a lot of students don't know, and it's such a great opportunity, and I'm just like you, that I wish somebody had done that for me. I wish we'd had that program when I was here.
Yes.
So we want to
take
encourage
advantage.
Take advantage. Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about what is it like when you are in a different country and you've been teaching these students and you see them experience it for the first time, or see them, the light bulb go off in their eyes. What is that like for you as an educator?
It feels like success. It truly does. And it is a really cool experience to watch my students, even, I hate to say it, it sounds like a negative, but it's really a positive, struggle at first, right? Because that's a scary experience. It's scary for a lot of students to speak in public anyway. We have a lot of introverts, right? And so to do that in another language, to order food, to ask for directions, to speak to someone on the street, to say excuse me, and all of the things that are important in living in society, to watch them do that in another language that they're not completely comfortable with is amazing. And I always tell them, if you can do this, you can do anything when you get back home. And especially in the lower levels of Spanish and beyond, our students have to give oral presentations in Spanish. So we start out at a 2 to 3 minute presentation. So by the time they're in their senior year, they're talking for 15 minutes in Spanish. So we tell them, if you can do that in Spanish, if you can live here for a couple of weeks interacting with the locals, doing the hard things, you are invincible when you get home. And I think they truly feel that way.
And so tell us a little bit about why you think it is so important for anyone, but especially young people, to learn another language.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many professional benefits to knowing a second language, just as far as marketability is concerned. They have done studies as recent as last year that show businesses pay often 5 to 20% more for a bilingual employee. That alone, I think, should be a motivation, right? Because I always tell my students, I want you to make all of the money that you can, then you can fly me to visit you, and that will be my reward. But also, there are so many cognitive benefits to learning a second language. they've done studies that show that being bilingual, sometimes trilingual, or a polyglot, it staves Alzheimer's and dementia by up to 4 to 5 years. So there are truly so many benefits to knowing a second language. I think it also just makes you a more empathetic person. You know, there are experiences that you cannot predict that happen. I've had students, former students email me. I had one email me this past summer who graduated several years ago, and she lives in California. And she sent me an email and she said, Dr. Suero, I don't know if you remember me, but I took your Spanish class and I want you to know that because I knew your specific dialect, which is Argentine Spanish, I was able to help this Argentine couple that was lost in the streets. Unexpected, right? Those are things that you never think about, and those, to me, those are the real wins. When students feel like I'm helping someone else, you know, if we're in the grocery store and, you know, someone needs a translator, all of a sudden, then here they are to help. And I have students that, I have one who's actually a communications major, a double Spanish major, who works at Publix, and she told me, you know, we'll have some customers come by and, you know, need a translator, and she's like, they volunteer me because I'm the one that speaks Spanish. And so I feel that the students feel very proud of that, their ability to not only sort of master something else that can be seen as difficult, but to help someone else. I think our students are profoundly empathetic people in general compared to, I mean, I'm a little biased of our students, but compared to other students at other schools, I think our students in particular truly care about other people, and I think that's very unique. I see a lot of students come through our courses who learn Spanish to be a missionary in another country, or to work in a hospital and help people there. So that's what's truly, I think, rewarding as a professor, to see them go out and do the things that makes them happy.
And you bring up such a great point that Spanish pairs with so many majors. I mean, it really could go along with any major we have here on campus because it would benefit any area of study here.
Yes.
In fact, a lot of our journalism students are Spanish minors because they want to get into journalism, and that helps them be more marketable to travel the world and tell stories.
Absolutely. And you know, today with all of the learning apps out there, and I use Duolingo, it's just not the same. I'm learning Vietnamese via Duolingo, which is a little bit easier for me because I understand the process behind learning other languages, but it isn't the same. And I'm glad I'm learning via Duolingo because I can tell my students that. And they tell me the same thing. They're like, there's no way this should ever replace classroom learning because you don't learn from your mistakes, right? You just learn, that's a word I'm supposed to say here, but not why, right? And so that's sort of the educational deduction they do from classroom learning, is that they learn, okay, this is an article, it's supposed to go here, so that next time they already know what to do, right? So,
well, for somebody like me who doesn't speak another language, but I have wanted to learn for so long, what would you say to us older adults who might want to learn another language? What advice would you give us?
I would say get as much Spanish input as possible. I always suggest to my students too, because that's a question for them. They want to be around Spanish as much as possible, and I only have so many hours in the day that I'm available personally. I do offer Spanish coffee hour. I'm the director of that. That's something I offer to anyone on campus, so for faculty, staff. I've had people from the community come who want to speak Spanish, but that's every first and third Wednesday of the month at 3 o'clock in Wright Hall. And it's just a way for everyone to sort of informally speak as much or as little Spanish as they want. And I bring traditional tea from Argentina, and so they can kind of partake in that cultural experience too, because drinking tea is a cultural experience in many parts of the world. But if you don't have time or are busy specifically during those times, I always say be a sponge, you know, soak in as much Spanish as possible. We love to stream in 2025. So I say get on Netflix. Netflix has a lot of international movies, a lot of international series. I can recommend some if you want to put it in your show notes later, or just for you, I'll text it to you later. But I just say get around Spanish as much as possible and use the apps. I mean, you know, not as good as formal learning, but it's better than nothing, right? And so, you know, keeping your brain active like that, I think too, is just really important. It's the first thing I do in the morning. When I wake up, after I let my pets out, as you know, I have a 300-pound pig.
I know, I was going to get to that.
That probably is another segment. But after I take care of my animals, I sit down and I do my Duolingo for 10 to 15 minutes and I feel more awake. I haven't even had coffee yet, but any way you can get that input in is going to be beneficial to you, and it's never too late to learn.
Well, I'm glad to know that. I thought Spanish coffee hour was just for students, so I'm glad
Anybody
to know
can
that we
come.
can stop by,
Yes,
because I actually
absolutely.
will take you up on that.
Yes, I would love that.
So you brought up your pig, and I did want to say, because this is about getting to know you as a person, tell us about your pet pig.
Yes, so I have a pet pig. His name is Sir Francis Bacon. You know, when I'm asked why do you have a pet pig, I don't have a good answer other than I just always wanted one. I just always wanted a pet pig, but I will say I saw the mini pet pigs. And when I got Sir Francis Bacon, he was going to be, I was told, between 20 to 60 pounds.
Wow.
He is 300 pounds. So that happens too. They don't stay small, but he is the sweetest, gentlest giant that I've ever known. So I love him so much. He's sort of a mascot, I think, maybe for the department at this point, but certainly in my classroom we talk about Sir Francis Bacon. I've had students do drawings of Sir Francis Bacon, and coffee hour we talk about him. So at some point we may need to do an on-site, on-location interview.
I'm all in.
And we can meet Sir Francis Bacon.
I can't even imagine. When I had a 50-pound dog, it was hard to take care of. I can't even imagine a 300-pound pet.
You know, it's like a big dog that doesn't bark. He's potty trained, so he goes in and out the doggy door. I have a dog and a cat too who do the same. So it's sort of a mixture of species. You know, my dog sort of acts like my pig acts like my cat. Nobody really knows what's going on, me least of all. But he is truly the love of my life, I would say.
I love it. I mean, it's so unusual, and I love when hearing you talk about it. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit more about your background and some of the things that you've done. And you wrote a book called Technology and Gendered Genre Evolution in Latin America, Writers, Bloggers, Activists, and Floggers. Tell us about this book.
It is a mouthful of a title. I'm sorry you had to say that.
It's fun to say.
I appreciate that. Yes, I based this book largely off of what I was doing with my dissertation. So part of my dissertation is a case study with an organization in Argentina called Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, which is grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo. And so what they are doing, they are looking for their missing grandchildren from Argentina's last dictatorship. So Argentina's last dictatorship was from 76 to 83. So if you think about it, you know, democracy hasn't been restored too incredibly long. But what had happened was anyone who was in opposition to the extreme right was often taken to a concentration camp. We think of that only being across the pond and very much alive in Latin America, unfortunately. So a lot of people who just simply disagreed with the alt-right were taken into concentration camps. A lot of them were pregnant women at the time, so they were allowed to give birth, and then often those babies were sold or given away. And so the grandmothers are the grandmothers of these missing grandchildren. There are about 500 of them. About 137 have been located today.
Wow.
And this organization has been nominated 5 times for a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm shocked they haven't won it yet. But I was actually able to work with this organization in Argentina. So at Purdue, I won a dissertation grant to work with them in their office, in their private library. And I conducted interviews with them. So this is when our fields sort of, you know, start to merge. And, you know, with very little to none journalism experience, it would have been helpful had I had it. So I'll do a plug for you there for journalism. But I interviewed some of the found grandchildren, and as well as with the vice president and president of the organization. So I essentially wrote about my experiences there, and yeah, that was one very important case study. What women in general in Latin America are doing with technology as far as a writing tool. So, you know, it's the evolution from the diary, which was, you know, essentially what we used to start writing since the beginning of time to the blog and what these really important Latin American women are doing to have a voice and have representation. And then what they're doing with science as far as DNA is concerned and finding these missing grandchildren. So, you know, it's interesting when you say like Spanish, I have a Spanish major, PhD. I think sometimes we so narrowly focus that on the language, which of course is important, but it really encapsulates so much more. And I always tell students, you never have to give up something that's interesting to you to do something else. So I was always interested in political science, but I like Spanish just a little bit more. I like my professors personally at Oklahoma State in Spanish just a little bit more. So, but I never gave that up. I never left that as an area to be studied. So yeah, my book largely deals with women and how they maneuver within these spheres.
What was it like working on this book and then finally see it come to fruition and see it in print?
It was extremely rewarding. As you know about the publication process, it can often be daunting and it can be disheartening. And I think learning from our rejections are often much more important than learning from our wins. I'm the first one to tell students how often I've heard no. I've heard no far more times than I've heard yes. And all it takes is that one important yes for it to work. And so I think, you know, at that age, I think, you know, us too, we were very frustrated and disheartened when we don't get what we want, or we try out for something and we don't get it, we don't win the prize. I was talking to one of my students about this in class the other day. And I said, you know, I heard probably 22 times no, 22 times. And then Lexington Books, which is, as you know, one of the biggest academic publishers, picked it up. So that's all it took, was the right one to say, this is what we happen to be looking for, right? So, you know, with any book, the publisher is essentially, it just has to match their interests, what they're looking for. And so you really want your work to find, you know, you take pride in it and you want your work to find its proper home. And I felt like Lexington Books was a good one for me.
Well, talking about you're the chair of the department, and what do you see as the future of world languages and culture here at Troy?
Yes, so I'm very excited to be chair of World Languages and Cultures, which is a rather new name. So previously, up until 2022, we were Modern Languages and Classics. So we're already starting to revamp in a way. Modern languages is sort of, you know, an older term, so we are being current with World Languages and Cultures. I became chair this past August when our former classics professor, who was also chair of the department, retired, and we had a great learning experience under him. He was a big reason why I accepted the job at Troy. The people, right? I had a strong connection with my department and with Dr. Howard, and I thought this is really a place where I can come and grow. And he really sort of fostered that environment when I got here. So it was sort of always on the horizon as far as just being in a leadership position. I really have done that my whole life, from being an SGA president in Oklahoma State to being the vice president of my sorority Chi Omega when I was at Oklahoma State. It's just always been something that felt comfortable to me. And you know, what I've learned in being in a leadership position is that it is entirely not about me. I am the one that is least about, and I think that's an interesting line to walk, because sometimes, you know, I am often the face or the image because I am the chair and we see, you know, the pictures and the photos, but all I care about is, you know, are my faculty and staff happy? Are they feeling supported to do their research? Are they feeling that I'm being a transparent boss? And I really try to lead with transparency. That is my biggest goal. I feel that when you are transparent, there's nothing to hide, right? And that also is conducive to an open, sort of friendly environment for my staff, that they feel like they can ask questions, because if I have the answers, I will share them, right? Often I don't, and I will be the first to say, I don't know, but let me ask the people up above me. But we are in a position right now where we are trying to strengthen our minor. And so unfortunately in 2022, our Spanish major was taken off the books. Not by us, we certainly did not want that. Nobody at Troy wanted that. That was more of a state thing that it was counting the numbers, and you know, we're a small department anyway. Ever since COVID, the numbers, you know, just weren't there. But we are seeing an uptick in Spanish minors. I think the word is getting out about how useful and fun having a Spanish minor is. And so that's sort of my focus now, is just really bolstering the enrollment there and trying to get the word out to students about something that I think would be extremely beneficial for their lives.
Well, Dr. Kelly Suero, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're so welcome.
Glad you could join
Thank
us.
you so
I tell you
much.
what, can you say thank you for joining us in Spanish to camera 2?
Gracias por estar con nosotros.
We'll see you next time.